So in this video, I'm going to address a very growing myth that one needs to keep adding weight to the bar or keep getting stronger in order to constantly progress with muscle growth. You see, strength is a very simplified metric of measuring muscle mass or just progress when it comes to hypertrophy. Yes, there's going to be some correlation between your strength and muscle. However, that is not an absolute necessity simply because there are other variables that can be manipulated to get more stimulus and make sure that your muscles keep growing, they keep getting bigger over time. You see, there are different exercises that we can think of. And so you see, it varies from muscle to muscle. Uh, and whether or not you see, sometimes it's not possible to keep adding weight to the bar or machine, whichever you are using, simply because of the steps that are the limiting factor in certain exercises, right? So, for example, if you're doing, let's say, squats with a relatively heavy weight, it's certainly one of the, uh, I would say, strongest exercises of any given individual. Uh, Adding a small amount of weight over time is possible, but let's say you're doing something that involves a smaller muscle group. Let's say you're doing lateral raises with the cable, right? So there isn't a lot of room for you to keep adding weight, especially if you're starting with 2 kilos, right? Even adding a 1 or 2 kg on top of that is just a jump of 50% or 100%. So the point I'm trying to make is that there's a lot of variance when it comes to whether it's possible to add weight. So this discussion is complicated. So if you like centering your workout around a single exercise, like in powerlifting, then you will eventually have to add strength. Or if you are someone who likes designing programs around a single compound movement, which is a very common practice, and I'd say it is there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I personally like doing that. Then there's a ceiling to how much volume you can add per session or even per week, right? So you can't simply keep adding sets in the name of progressive overload and expect to keep growing, because after a while it'll become extremely inefficient. So in this context, I should mention that the term progressive overload is a very broad term that can be applied to the context of both load, volume, frequency, multiple variables. Now, it's a term that gets casually thrown around, but it has very little to do with the actual load. I mean, there is uh, load is a part of the discussion. It's just that the load in overload is not literal in the sense. Now, coming to the topic of adding weights. Now, if you're using a machine where the steps are relatively small, so like the smallest unit of weight is a few kgs, then you can reliably add weight over time. Um, but if, let's say, you are using something where the jumps are a lot higher, for example, fixed dumbbells to do, let's say, shoulder press, right? Uh, so the jumps are really prominent and you're bound to run into a brick wall of some sort eventually if you just think along the terms of adding weight to increase your uh, shoulder muscles, right? So if you are thinking of building your shoulders, then if you are relying solely on the metric of jumping from a lower weight dumbbell to some higher weight, then you are bound to run into a wall, right? So you'll need a lot more to move up a step. And then it's a completely different discussion. I'll briefly discuss that in the later part of the video. But yeah, you'll have to run a bunch of different, I would say, periodization and sort of volumetric tapering to eventually make the next jump. And so if you keep going from one dumbbell to another, if you think like a beginner, so on day one or the first month or so of training, it takes a very little for your shoulders to grow, both in terms of size and strength. So you can generally bump up in weight just a few weeks. But if you keep expecting this to happen, you are simply going to plateau hard. And I see this with exercises such as the shoulder press mostly. Also with the dumbbell, I would say dumbbell chest press. And this also varies with for women and people who are overall smaller in size. If for them, let's say they consider 25 pounds or 12 kilos as a decent weight, the next immediate jump that's available to be used is a 15 kg dumbbell, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're already struggling with 12.5 kgs, then that jump is going to make a world of difference, right? And so this applies not just to smaller athletes, even for, let's say, bigger athletes. It's just that the this barrier comes a lot later, so the plateau zone is slightly higher, but it exists for every single person, right? So, for example, I remember getting stuck in the 20 kg, 22.5 kg mark before I progress to higher weights. And then this can be like 30, 35, or 40 kgs for you if you're someone who's either naturally strong or just has some sort of I would say genetically blessed to have better shoulder strength to execute the movement properly. So, anyways, there's a lot of reasons as to why we plateau at a certain weight. Sometimes it's just it's very difficult to move the weight around, like the maneuver the weight to the starting position, right? And so it's just not about the pressing part, it's also about carrying the grip, the stability. There's like n number of variables we are tackling while executing the movement. Whereas with us, let's say simple machine shoulder press, it's just about the amount of force you can exert because all of these extra variables get eliminated while using the machine press, which kind of makes it both a tool for building muscle efficiently, but all the while removing critical elements that actually allow you to exert that force. So if your strength kind of exceeds the overall stability, you actually might end up injuring yourself. And so that is one thing that we don't really talk about. Of course, there's going to be a limitation. Your body will naturally limit how much strength you can put while not tackling the stability aspect. But yeah, if your strength is a lot far ahead compared to the stability aspect, then your shoulder might just be a victim of its own strength. If that makes sense. So anyway, so if you're someone who's either naturally strong at that movement or has just some sort of shoulder strength, um, the plateau zone is going to come a lot later for you. But everyone needs, everyone will eventually need some kind of program, some kind of strategy to overcome their personal barrier. And as far as the weights are concerned, this jump from one, like these huge jumps when it comes to dumbbells, there isn't a lot you can do over there. Also, there could be other reasons as to why you don't want to use heavier weights sometimes. It's not just about your capability, right? But if I'm someone who wants to build my shoulders in the most efficient manner possible, simply because I have other exercises to do, other muscles to hit, right? It's a part of, let's say, a powerlifting program where I need to save my systemic resources for the squat, deadlift, bench press. I might have to find other ways to hit this hit shoulders. And so limiting ourselves to this theory of mandatorily adding weight is an incomplete discussion. Now, keep in mind, this isn't completely false. It's just an incomplete theory. Um, so, like I said, it works better for compound movements such as squats and deadlifts. You can reliably add weights. You can add fractional plates to kind of smoothen out the difficulty curve, right? But for isolations, things like Lateral raises, especially, it's one of the most, I would say, notorious exercises. It's known for um, this very reason that you can't keep adding weight. Like the jumps are unbelievably difficult. Now, what can we do to integrate this lesson into our workout plan, right? So, in my personal experience, the best long term approach is a combination of um, alternatively adding volume and intensity in different exercises or splits. So, it's like you build the volume first, so you move horizontally before moving vertically, right? This is very common strategy. There's nothing new about this discussion, but I thought let's at least discuss this theoretically. Now, coming to the actionable step, what can we do to integrate this lesson into our workout plan? Now, in my personal experience, the best long term approach that you can use to reliably, I would say, add more muscle and strength simultaneously is alternating between adding volume and intensity in different exercises. So, like we move horizontally first before moving up vertically. Again, this is a very well known strategy. It's not anything new that I'm discussing. So, first, we increase the number of sets per exercise. Let's say you're working in the 5 rep range because it's known for being the sweet spot between strength and hypertrophy goals. Again, it varies from exercise to exercise from different from person to person. But yeah, this is a very general, it's a good guideline, good starting point. So 5 reps for, let's say, for 3 sets, right? Very standard starting point. And then over the next few weeks, we keep adding an extra set. So 4 sets, 5 sets, and 6 sets. And you keep doing this until, let's say, you get to around 8 sets, right? And then after doing that, so first we'll increase the number of sets per exercise, or simply add a few novel exercises before tapering off into a new load zone. Now, since we are on the topic, let me clarify the difference between adding weight and adding intensity. They aren't the same thing, right? You can do a high rep, low weight set, like doing higher reps with a lower weight till failure, absolutely going for that burn and trembling in the last rep. And that can actually be more intense than doing, let's say, 3 to 4 reps, leaving a few reps in the tank with a heavier load. So intensity is a different, is very different from heavy, right? So I thought I should clarify that, but I don't want to include the discussion of intensity, although that is also a factor that drives growth, both hypertrophy and strength, because there will be too many variables to properly understand anything. So, with intensity out of the way, let's discuss how to manipulate volume and load. Now, let's take the example of shoulder presses with 25 kgs in each arm. You can think with your own weight that you're currently using. I just thought of using this example because it's a decent weight for anyone. I want to move up to, let's say, 30 kgs. And so this 5 kg jump is a 20% bump. So 25 kg, uh, if you do the math, it's like 5 times 5. So like 20%. So you are aiming to move up by 20%. I mean, 10% jump is a lot as it is. 20% is unbelievable. So it's going to take a while. So typically we move up. The best percentage to add to the current weight is around 2 to 3%. 5% variance works great for periodization, right? So 80, 85%, 90, 95%. If you are familiar with powerlifting program, or if you ran it in the past, you know how it works. But beyond that, it's pushing it, especially for shoulders and chest. So it looks something like this. Our primary rep range is 5, like I said. Week 1, we can do 3 sets with 25 kgs, and then over next few weeks or sessions, we keep adding weight until it's around 8 to 10 sets. It's a lot, but I didn't want to further complicate this discussion with variables such as frequency and total number of weekly volume and things like that. Uh, so let's just say we are doing 8 total sets per week. Uh, that's the ceiling we are aiming to hit. We exchange every 2 sets of 25s with one set of 30s in the following week. So we are collapsing volume for weight. And then we keep doing this. So the first, I would say, the first tapering, in the tapering phase, we take two of those sets and replace with one set of 30. So we do 6 sets of 25, 6 set with 25s, and then one set with 30s. And then the following week, we do 4 sets with 25s and then 2 sets with 30s, and then eventually we'll get to around 4 sets with 30s. Again, this is just a general strategy. We haven't really discussed the frequency, the accessory work, which is extremely important. It's absolutely indispensable. I mean, it's almost, this discussion without the discussion of frequency and accessory work is almost like wrong because it's so incomplete. Now, I drifted off a little bit to discuss this strategy to demonstrate the inseparable connection between volume and load increment. Um, Note that this is just one strategy to increase your dumbbell shoulder press strength and also add muscle as a consequence of that. But this is only if you are centering your workout around a primary movement. If you are constraining yourself with a single movement, I mean, even if there are better ways to add muscle to your shoulders, sometimes we just want to do certain exercises and keep them as staples of our workout simply because of a culture of versatility, or simply because you want to do it, right? So the discussion of what's the absolute best uh, is irrelevant, and that's assuming we even know what that is, right? It's all about research, experimentation, and then having multiple studies that are constantly fighting one another, contradicting one another, right? There's lots of room for debates as to what's the best. But ultimately, this one is a great balance between um, increasing overall volume and load. Uh, I'm deliberately avoiding the word intensity because of its connotations. Intensity might be load in certain discussions, but yeah. So the other way is adding different variations, which is closely related to volume as well. So doing multiple kinds of isolation work um, keeps things fresh and interesting. Um, and with regards to utilizing this variation based strategy, um, it also pairs well with having a staple exercise. So, like, you can keep one exercise as the constant, right? A shoulder press, right? You can even maintain your strength on the shoulder press. Like, if you can actually tackle that, if you can accept that I'll just do this as a part of maintaining my shoulder strength, and in order to move up, in order to stimulate further growth, you can constantly switch up the rest of the exercises that follow your staple. So that is something that I've been doing for the past few years, because I also run certain strength programs. So for example, you start with shoulder press, and then there's an entire room you can work with. You can do some tricep work, you can do machine shoulder press, maybe some lateral raises, and then emphasize certain isolation work over the others in either certain weeks, or just vary that from one workout to workout, right? So you can even wing it if you like. uh, I would say surprising yourself, or just and keep things fresh and interesting. So I hope this video made sense. Of course, I drifted off the main topic to discuss some adjacent ideas that I thought was worth mentioning. So there are n number of ways you can add muscle. If that's your primary goal, then you can either use the getting stronger strategy, or use variation method, or just simply a combination of everything. Like if you have something interesting to say, if you have a unique way of approaching this problem, if there's something that's unique that has worked out for you, make sure to share that in the comments below. And then I'm also a personal coach. If you want to work with me one on one, you'll find the details in the channel description. And stay tuned for more.